Welcome to the Bugatti Tourbillon, the all-new Molsheim Monster that's replacing the earth-shattering Chiron, unveiled in probably the most French way possible. It's powered by a naturally aspirated V, not a W, but a V16 that makes 1,000 horsepower, screams to over 9,000 RPM, and has been specifically designed to stir emotion. And when in concert with its specially developed electric motors and chassis-integrated battery, this car produces an unbelievable 1,800 combined horses and is capable of reaching a staggering 276 miles per hour. It's got gorgeously developed electric gull-wing doors, and an interior, an instrument cluster, and steering wheel that are literally works of art. Picasso would be proud. And despite all that, Bugatti found a way to make it lighter than the outgoing model. And as exciting as that all is, we thought that today we should take a look back to appreciate where this car came from. Enjoy. This is the car that invented the term hypercar. It has 4 turbochargers, a 221 mile per hour top speed, and it's the OG inspiration for some absolutely insane models that would come after, including the Veyron. It's the result of a revived brand that has been dead for 30 years. In its day, this machine was world-shattering, and even though it burned very bright, it didn't last long. It was only produced for 4 short years, but broke more than a few records in the process. That's right, it is the Bugatti EB110, and this is the death of a legend. Let's go. Let me introduce you to a car. No, a masterclass on how a car should be built. It's a car that could have, or maybe actually should have, propelled Bugatti past the performance prowess of Ferrari more than 30 years ago, the EB110. Right off the bat, the centerpiece of this engineering marvel, no, like literally it's in the center of the car, is the engine. It's a 3.5-liter V12 with 4, yes, count them, 4 turbochargers. And by incorporating Yamaha's 5-valve technology, the base GT model produces 553 horsepower, while the Big Daddy SS version made an alien for the time output of 603 horsepower. And of course, if there's only one thing you know about the EB110, it's that the quad-turbo V12 has enough horses to power a small village somewhere in Switzerland. But this car is much, much more than that. It's quantifiably the world's first hypercar, and one of the most important cars Bugatti has ever built. Reviving the brand and elevating Bugatti right back to the top of the charts meant it didn't have the luxury of being a one-trick pony. It had to move fast in all directions, and that they did. At the humbling circuit, also known as the Green Hell, also known as the Nurburgring Nordschleife, the EB110 set a blistering fast lap of 7 minutes and 47 seconds. You don't know how fast that is? Well, let me put that into perspective. The Porsche 997 GT3 that was released 15 years later with a 15-year advantage in performance technology ran exactly the same time as the Bugatti did in the early 90s. But if you really want your socks blown to space, how about the fact that the EB110 is just 7 seconds slower than its 1,000 horsepower younger brother, the Veyron? And keep in mind, that's a 7-second difference over a track that's over 13 miles long. Anyways, the EB110 wasn't just an absolute freak on the track. It carried all that badassery over to the road too, where it pulled a world record 0.99 Gs on the skid pad and had some of the best handling of its generation. And maybe that was because it was all-wheel drive. Wait, what? You didn't know it was all-wheel drive? Okay, I can forgive you for that, because watching someone drive this car hard would make you think it was driven by the rear wheels 100% of the time. But speaking of percentages, power distribution was 73% to the rear, meaning it had all of the drama of a rear-drive supercar, but had the front wheels helping keep it off the guardrail. And speaking of guardrails, someone very important, famous, and good-looking who happened to be a professional race car driver crashed their EB110. Stay tuned to find out who that was. Either way, it was possibly the best and most neutral driving 600 horsepower supercar with no assistance in automotive history. Plus, journalists at the time praised its composed and compliant ride. However, it had massive competition. Stuff like the incomparable Ferrari F40, and eventually the F50 just a few years later, the savage Jaguar XJ220, and of course, the bane to the EB110's Batman, the iconic McLaren F1. In fact, the F1 played something of a spoiler to the EB110. You see, they were released within a year of each other, were within 25 horsepower of each other, and were both the halo cars for their respective brands. And at the time of the EB110's release, it was the world's fastest car with a top speed of 218 miles per hour. But just a few months after the EB110's 218 mile per hour run, the F1 said, "Oh, I'll be taking that, lad," and took the record for itself. And then broke their very own record a few years later with a run of 240 miles per hour. But that didn't really matter to Bugatti. You see, the EB110 represented much more than just a top speed claim to fame for the newly revamped Bugatti brand. This car was a crescendo and a symphony that had been building up for years upon years. Where the F1 was a dream forged by the genius of one man, Gordon Murray, the EB110 was a passion project from the innermost depths of Bugatti as a brand. It was Bugatti.
First things first, Ettore Bugatti, the founder of the famous French car company, was actually Italian. He was born in Milan to one of the most Italian-sounding names of all time. But Ettore absolutely despised the fact that he was Italian-born and literally referred to his own birthday as that accident.
He was so put off by Italy for some reason that when he started his company, it was founded in modern-day France, or what used to be Germany. So why do you need to know all this?
Well, Bugatti was the most artful, expensive, and exclusive brand back in the first half of the 20th century. You have to remember, Ettore was such a perfectionist that he designed and manufactured his own silverware because no one else's forks and knives were good enough. In fact, he designed and built most of the objects he surrounded himself with, from the toys for his own children to the machines he used to build the cars to the electricity required to run those machines. And this obsession with perfection was evident in his cars. Not only were the cars themselves works of art, but so too were every single nut, bolt, and part that made a car a car.
I mean, we're talking about the guy that used to invite you over to dinner just to watch your table manners and determine whether or not you deserved the chance to own a Bugatti.
But after Ettore's death in 1947, the company pretty much stopped making cars and closed its doors in 1952. The company was sold off to the Spanish automaker Hispano-Suiza, which itself was absorbed into Snecma, which then itself absorbed Messier. For all intents and purposes, any Bugatti DNA still left attached to the name was circling the toilet. But in the most ironic turn of events ever, in the late 80s, Bugatti would be resurrected by a group of Italians. Those two Italians were Ferruccio Lamborghini and Romano Artioli. See, Lamborghini had sold his company a few years before and was considering re-entering a business with a bold and attention-grabbing supercar to kick off his new brand. He hired Artioli to help him facilitate the beginnings of their new business, which was initially going to be called Furla, after Ferruccio Lamborghini. I mean, he'd sold the rights to the Lamborghini name, he couldn't use that. Artioli, though, had a better idea. At the time, he was the Southern European distributor for Suzuki and owned the largest Ferrari dealership on the planet. And it was he who suggested to this new Furla team that their bold new supercar should instead be badged a Bugatti, and most importantly, move the operations back to Italy. As you probably could have guessed, Lamborghini backed away from the project, probably because Artioli didn't want it to be part of Ferruccio's suggested new brand, but hey, the world keeps turning.
Okay, so to clarify, an Italian guy who hated Italy started a company in Germany until World War I happened and Molsheim became French and then he died. Then two Italian guys named Lamborghini and Artioli were gonna start Furla, but then the one guy who liked Ferraris decided Bugatti was a stronger brand and took the company from France, which used to be Germany, to Italy. Got it? Moving on.
So, Artioli and his gaggle of Italians moved all operations to Campo Galliano, Italy, which was within spitting distance of companies like Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Maserati. Not bad company if you want to build supercars, huh? The new Bugatti Dream Team included names like Gandini and Bertone and some of the absolute goats behind pretty much every drool-worthy supercar of the last 20 years. And they went to some serious lengths to make sure that the soul of this new dream machine would be as bespoke as humanly possible.
And that all started with the engine.
The designers knew they had to make the statement of all statements with the powertrain of the first Bugatti in 30 years. So were they going to do a V8 like Ferrari did with the F40? Nah, too predictable. What about a V10 and make the first ever modern 10-cylinder supercar? Too easy. What they settled on was a V12, literally built to the specs of the then current Formula 1 cars. But that's not all. The 3.5-liter V12 was supposed to be bespoke, remember? So Bugatti literally machined the entire engine in-house from the crank to the block to the heads and everything in between. They were so out of everyone's league, they didn't even use a belt or a chain for the cam timing. No, instead the entire valve train is driven by a series of gears. And as the icing on the cake, this engine has amongst the shortest stroke length of any production car ever. Meaning you could wind it out to over 8,000 RPM. To make this power plant even crazier, Bugatti cast the engine and transmission into one single unit, connected to each other by a housing that ran the crankshaft and transmission's main shafts right next to each other. After all was said and done, the 5-valve per cylinder, 8,250 RPM quad turbo V12 was nothing short of the engineering feat of the decade, and the perfect engine to go in the car that would resurrect one of the most iconic brands in history. This was a marvel, folks. Bugatti's flaming torch against the dangerous competition. And oh, speaking of torches, they literally had the youngest worker at the old Molsheim factory light a flame and place it into a beautifully made case that was mounted to the front of a Bugatti Galibier, where it was then driven along with 77 other classic Bugattis to the new factory 400 miles away, where the youngest employee of the new company then used it to light a torch at the plant's grand opening and had it blessed by the Archbishop of Modena, aka the most Italian thing to ever happen. Oh, and that new factory? It was so shockingly gorgeous that they had to artificially bank the road that ran next to it to keep people from getting distracted and crashing. Its ceiling design was inspired by the wheel of a Bugatti Type 59, with windows all the way around to provide the design team with soft natural light. They used energy recovered from the dynos they used to break in the engines to power the air conditioning system. And while the new factory may not have used flatware and ceramics built by Bugatti, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single piece of the building that wasn't emblazoned with the Bugatti logo, even the storm drains.
If you think the EB110 or the later Veyron or Chiron are beautiful, just wait till you see the factories these things were built in.
So, it was built in a shockingly pretty factory with a completely bespoke and beautifully made engine. But the engine was only one part of the puzzle that made it go fast in a straight line. But to make this absolute bruiser of a supercar go around corners, well, they once again had to go balls to the wall. And to do it, the car had to be light. The team designed the first fully carbon monocoque to ever be fitted to a street car. The structure only weighed 275 pounds and would allow all the heavy bits to be concentrated in the mid-centered engine bay and be sprung by front and rear double wishbone suspension. They also gave this beast all-wheel drive with the front-to-rear power split of 27-73 we mentioned earlier, which gave the car unmatched grip out of the corners and the ability to rotate in a controlled manner through tight hairpins. The team also equipped the EB110 with some of the biggest production rear tires at the time to handle the massive torque spike that was probably 10 times scarier than the Widowmaker 930. Add in a short throw 6-speed manual gearbox and some beefy Brembo brakes, and you've got yourself, well, a legend. And speaking of legends, it's time to tell you who crashed their EB110. It was Michael Schumacher. You know, the guy that won 7 F1 titles, but apparently couldn't handle the quad-turbo demon. Or maybe there was something wrong with this car, seeing as Bugatti was pretty quick to make sure none of that ever made the headlines. Personally, that actually makes the car cooler in my opinion. But what you should take away from this Schumacher tangent is that the EB110's launch was such a big deal that even the champ himself was immediately sold on this revolutionary car. The 1991 unveiling of the EB110 was not just a celebration of a new car, it was a celebration of the man who started it all, Ettore Bugatti. You see, the September 15th launch event, with all its high-profile guests, flower arrangements, and fancy dinners, was the date of Ettore Bugatti's 110th birthday. EB110. You're starting to get it now, aren't you? This was a spectacle of the grandest proportions for a company that was ready to stick it to the rest of Italy and the rest of the performance car world for that matter. And it was all riding on the EB110's shoulders. And to its credit, this thing was the definition of a world beater. When the car was officially tested after production had started, it immediately cleared the field of any competition. Its world record lists include things like the fastest accelerating car, the fastest production sports car, the fastest sports car run on natural gas, the fastest production vehicle of all time, and the highest skid pad G-force numbers ever tested by Road and Track. It was also the most comfortable supercar of the era, with forgiving everyday suspension tuning, a high-tech, for the time, stereo system, and leather seats that were partially designed by the world-renowned furniture brand Poltrona Frau. All that stuff gave it one final world record, the most expensive new car. It cost customers 450 million Italian lira, which sounds ridiculous, but it's really around 350,000 US dollars at the time. Convert that into 2024 dollars and you've got yourself a price tag of about $800,000. The amount of money that went into this project probably required such an insane price tag just to keep the lights on at the Bugatti factory. I mean, when they developed this car, its engine and transmission and chassis amongst other things were all designed in-house. But several of the parts like the brakes, interior, and the body design were contracted out to other companies. But these factors are almost irrelevant to this car's death, as the beginning of the end had come long before the EB110 was ever developed. You see, in October of 1987, 5 days after the new Bugatti company had been established and 4 full years before the EB110 was launched, there was an event called Black Monday. It saw the world's economies and stock markets take a historic dump and led the globe into one of the most serious recessions in history. The result was obvious. People weren't willing, or in some cases flat out weren't able to plop down big money anymore. And some of the people who could have afforded a $350,000 car in the 80s just literally couldn't swing it in the early 1990s in the aftermath of the economic crisis. And when the EB110 hit the market in the first 2 years of the 90s, the gargantuan price tag was simply the cherry on top of the cake that the public had eaten for years at this point. The EB110 was a revolutionary automotive feat, but was only regarded in that light by car enthusiasts like Michael Schumacher and you and me, people who knew what this car meant to the world. For other rich folks, it wasn't worth taking a chance on a car from Bugatti, a company that had only just begun its renaissance. They would rather buy a Ferrari or a Lamborghini for less money. Bugatti set out to sell 150 of these Halo cars each year of its production run, but after 3 years of manufacturing, they had only produced a total of around 134 units, 95 GTs, 37 SSs, and 2 factory race cars, each with 670 horsepower. Romano Artioli claimed that the company went bankrupt with a full book of orders, because a certain competitor threatened Bugatti's suppliers to stop sending parts, and even paid off its employees to mess up the cars. But if you ask others that were there, well, it was because Bugatti just couldn't pay its bills. There's also the fact that Artioli lost his distribution with Suzuki allegedly, because he apparently pissed them off in another deal. We might never know what happened for sure, but after 1995, the EB110 was gone forever. And 3 years after that, Bugatti was sold once again, leaving its factories, fans, the EB110, and the brand itself to fade into the history books. But this car will never leave the hearts and minds of us car lovers. It was one of the most ambitious, pure, and raw supercars ever conceived. It arguably invented the term hypercar. It revamped a company that had been dead for 30 years and then put the pressures on companies like Ferrari and Lamborghini that had dominated the space for decades. And, above all else, this was just a freaking spaceship of an automobile. It was fast, looked like a rocket, and broke records like nobody's business. The silver lining out of all this came just a decade later when Bugatti was refired again, this time under Ferdinand Piëch and Volkswagen. where the Bugatti crest once again broke world records and any previous engineering ceilings they had with the Veyron. They kept the spirit of the EB110 alive with the release of the Bugatti EB110, a 1,577 horsepower hypercar whose design and mission was a nod to the immortalized EB110. But regardless of the current state of Bugatti and what they have done to pay homage to the EB110, there will never be anything quite like it ever again. It was from a time with no computerists, no rules, and unlimited ambition. And, like we said earlier, this car should have taken the crown away from Ferrari decades ago if it weren't for outside forces that dictated its fate years before it ever emerged. Now, let me let you in on just a little secret. In the early 2000s, 5 more EB110s were produced. See, a mad scientist, Mr. Dower, purchased the remaining parts and chassis Bugatti never completed, including the world's only unpainted carbon fiber Dower EB110. The use of carbon fiber for lightweight and strength in the EB110 helped popularize this material in supercar construction, leading to its extensive use in later hypercars like the McLaren P1, the LaFerrari, and the Pagani Huayra. The rear-wheel biased all-wheel drive system helped pave the way for mass adoption in the supercar realm, making cars handle better and saving a lot of low-performance drivers' lives along the way. And the first of its kind, quad-turbo V12 engine, pushed other manufacturers to explore extreme engine configurations and turbocharging to achieve higher power outputs. This can be seen in cars like the Koenigsegg Agera and the Bugatti Veyron itself, but also pushing the envelope of hybrid technology in the Porsche 918 Spider and Ferrari LaFerrari. They say, respect your elders, and every supercar that's come after the EB110 has somehow been influenced by the OG Bugatti hypercar, and this trailblazer is a pretty incredible legend to descend from. So folks, what is the most shocking thing about the EB110, and have you ever seen one in person? Let us know in the comments below. Also, like the video if you enjoyed it, really helps us out. Subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and check out these Death of Legends up here, or whatever YouTube recommends you watch next down here. I'm Brad, this is Ideal, we'll see you next week, and promise me one thing, keep living the ideal lifestyle.